everybody. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. I'm Brian Doyle, and with me, as always, is one of my co-hosts. Right now, we've got a little storm going in the Northeast as we record this, and Rob is still resisting buying a generator, huh, Tim?
Yep. I'm not exaggerating. The 3 years he's lived in upstate New York, probably 10 times he's lost his power, usually multiple days.
No joke. This is the third time he's used that excuse for the podcast too.
Yes.
So when he gets mad at us because we keep doing this without him, it sounds like a personal problem. But anyway, I want to welcome our guests that are joining us today. Many of you know our guests from being out in the tour circuit here in MSP land. But with us today, we've got George Bardissi, who he holds a few different hats over at Philly Metro, bvoip, and of course the MSP Initiative. And with him is his marketing coordinator, Sade Mendez, as well. And she's joining us to talk about all the wacky things that George makes her do. So with that, I want to welcome you guys and thank you very much for joining us today. How are you?
Thanks for coming on.
Well, we're having some snow here. Definitely not the 8 feet or whatever you're having in upstate New York with the generator. But all I know is that by the time we watch this, you know, the NFL playoffs and Super Bowl would have probably happened. But on Sunday, it'll be 50 degrees. In Philadelphia in January, that's a win.
Yeah, and we got to throw some props out there as well. Yeah. You know, I'm one of those terrible Dallas fans, George. And Tim, are you a Giant fan or is that not fun?
No, I'm a Bills fan.
You know, of course. Oh, so you had a rough weekend too.
Yeah, could have been better.
So George, it sounds like you're the only man standing on this podcast. Football season's over for us. All I got's my little fantasy trophy behind me to hang on to for the rest of this season.
There's bragging rights attached.
But you know, we love to kick things off with getting to know our guests as well. So, you know, George, maybe kick off and tell us a little bit of your backstory and, you know, how you ended up today. I know you came up through the ranks of a lot of different areas of MSP, so we'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, like a lot of people, and I call it the MSP sandbox. That's what I like to call it. You know, starts off with somebody who either out of the garage, backseat of their car, basement, whatever, right? Like just was really good at picking up tech, and a lot of people need help with it. And, you know, generally speaking, I guess at a young age, I kind of self-taught a lot of my, you know, the things that I learned at that time and kind of got into it. And, you know, by luck or by just sheer fact that I needed to make money somewhere, some way, with some shape, somehow. I started an IT services company back when I was still in high school. I actually got caught rolling into the school on a weekend when other things were happening, and like installing an access point in the cafeteria, you know, while I was, you know, back in the day. And then like somehow that turned into, I wired the rest of the school and started an IT company, and like it kind of launched from there, you know, interestingly. But so I started back in 2001 as a young buck, and you know, kind of like everybody else, grew my business through referrals and word of mouth, and, you know, kind of learned the pains of hiring people, you know, when it gets past, you know, were you doing everything on your own, and, you know, what projects and break fix, and then the bronze, gold, silver tiers that never worked out the way that you wanted to, and ultimately one plan to rule them all. Like I literally went through every stage in the worst possible way, the hard way. Like you actually didn't take any advice and you just learned on your own. By the way, don't suggest that. Definitely from other people. So, and then ultimately, you know, having gotten to a certain point in my MSP, one of the things that we tackled, like a lot of the other guys that pop out, right, have a need inside of their MSP. They didn't find a need, you know, an answer for it out there. They built something. So I started bvoip as a channel only solution out of our MSP as a separate entity in late 2014. And then that's been going pretty well, you know, since then. And then in mid 2020, when everybody was stuck at home and listening to, you know, having to wear masks everywhere and maybe not leaving your house, but fresh air somehow was still a good thing. We ended up starting MSP Initiative. That's when we started rolling. Me and good old Ken Patterson, who was at Sade at the time, jumped on a tour bus, and Sade jumped on there a few times too. Started rolling through America by road and then through parking lots of MSPs, taking all those tailgating skills I learned through my, you know, upbringing, being an Eagles fan. Don't hold it against me. And effectively, you know, doing something while everybody else was going nowhere. So that's like my journey in a 30,000 foot overview.
That's beautiful. And it's funny, so many
Cool.
different things came out of the COVID times that are new and innovative to our group. Quite honestly, that's how we started our podcast. Tim Rob and I were just trying to figure out, well, how do we make sure that while we're figuring this stuff out, that we still get together every once in a while? And here we are 140 or so episodes later.
Yeah.
And while we're talking about this, you mentioned Ken Patterson. We should give him a shout out too. I see that he has now started his new role over at Taylor Business Group.
Yeah,
So
I think he ended up at a really great place. And, Ken is like literally like bleeds community and for good reason, right? I think that that's something that makes, our whole sandbox work a lot better. And I think that the better that gets, the better people learn from somebody else rather than the hard way. So love Ken, couldn't have spent, I think it was like tens of thousands of miles on the road with anybody but Ken Patterson, or probably somebody who was crazy enough to do it with me. And that's how the cookie crumbled.
So we've let George have a lot of airtime here. So let's pass it over to you, Sade. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you ended up in the world of MSP.
So I ended up in the world of MSP as a happy accident. Someone that I had worked with back in 2017 was kind of in and out of the MSP sandbox, as we call it. And she had let me know of an opportunity over at bvoip that they were looking for a marketing and events person, essentially doing similar things to what I was already doing, but just in a totally different market. And I figured, well, how hard can it really be? And
then you got on the bus.
Oh, well, the bus was really the main start of it, because I would say the first, so I joined back in 2019. And from there, the bus didn't happen until less than a year later, but about a year later. And from there, it really wasn't until the bus that I started actually developing a true concept of what exactly the MSP land is like. And George pretty much took me under his wing and just kind of showed me a little bit of everything. But as you know, with George, it's never the same day. There's always something. So definitely always kept me on my toes. And really not much has changed, at least in regards to that portion. But it's just now getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and just kind of challenging ourselves to see, okay, well, we did this time or last year. So now how do we take that? How do we make it better? How do we make it bigger? And so on.
Very cool. I know I'm sure I'm not alone where I saw you all, I followed you on LinkedIn going all over the country while you were doing it. So what are the big things for 2023 now that we're in another year and winter in the Northeast, but still warmer in some other areas?
It's true. So, we parked the bus for a little while. I think we need to let it cool down, and we put plenty of miles on. So we're flipping it into
7,000.
We're flipping that into 2 in-person events here in 2023. We wanted to do more, but we're kind of changing into a little bit of a new format. I want to make sure that we got it down right and test it out. So that's going to be called MSP Community Mines. There's going to be a 2-day event in Dallas and another 2-day event in Denver. One's in, I think, May, and another one's in August or September. So it's online. I got to go look at the dates. But basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring in experts from all across MSP sandbox land, and like actually have them do more than just a PowerPoint presentation with bullet points, right? Like, I think collectively on this screen, we've been to thousands, probably more like hundreds, but thousands of breakout sessions. And it's like, how many times did you walk out of that with like scribble notes and then like you didn't do anything, right? Yeah. So we're trying to bring in like actual people who come and do workshops, right? They're going to present on an idea. This is what we're trying to solve for. This is the outcome. So for an example, it could be we're bringing in somebody like Brad Gross, who will come in and say, bring your MSA with you. And in this workshop, we're going to break that apart and understand how bad your contracts really are. And like what you actually need in there to make sure that like when it goes wrong, and it can, and it will, you're not ending up in court. So like, that's an example of like, hey, we need to actually have time to do more than just, hey, look at these things. Like, no, bring your stuff with you and let's actually get into it. And so like with that model in mind, this is why we call it MSP Community Mines. We're trying to bring these experts in and, hey, listen, we know we might not get through all of it in that one sitting, but you'll surely get way past PowerPoint presentation and bullet points, and hopefully towards your end goal rather than you just didn't do it. I mean, that's the problem. So that's what's happening from an educational standpoint this year instead of the tour bus. And then, of course, our crazy parties, these, we call them the MSP block parties, and they've gotten bigger. And as Sade said, crazier. I don't think we ever envisioned bringing in like a radio recognizable band to host one of those, but we did, and we learned.
Hurricane.
I was going to say, don't leave out in a hurricane.
I somehow like
it was.
If I ever did a Netflix documentary on that week, you would never believe the stuff that happened, especially in the 24 hours of the event.
It was amazing how everybody with their venues were able to adapt in such short a time and realistically keep this little cocoon of life going on when everything else was shut down.
They said it was the biggest hurricane party they could remember. I said, all right, that's a win, I guess.
Nice way of saying a bunch of insane people that should be inside, right?
Yeah, I think so.
But yeah, Tim and I attended the block party. We had a good time. I know Tim had a good time.
We had a good time. A lot of people did.
But yeah, you guys did a great job with that. And it's great to see the community kind of now taking the conferences and extending them out a little bit further as well, and really bringing other options for the attendees to get together and continue the day in a different way. So kudos, man.
I think there's a new blueprint coming out for the conference event or the channel event, and not saying that what in the past didn't work. I'm surely got us to this point, but need to be a little bit more creative. And I think that the people who are willing to collaborate together can do some pretty cool things. But the people who are like, nope, I think we have a blueprint, we're just going to rinse and repeat. Well, then you just got to get a rinse and repeat.
Yep.
Well, I think to your point, I mean, how many conferences do you go to, excuse me, or how many breakouts do you go to? Somebody's got a PowerPoint on the screen and all they do is read off the PowerPoint.
The worst kind of presentation ever.
Brutal.
So anybody listening out there who does that, stop.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, you've put your audience to sleep.
Yeah.
And, I think it's exciting to think about really putting together a collection of workshops, because one of the biggest takeaways from a conference is what can I action on and what can I do next with this information? And you do get that overload, right? What was really exciting at 2:00 on Thursday is forgotten by Saturday afternoon. And, if you can find a way to put that into action faster, and if you guys can build a formula for that, that's going to be exciting to watch. Because that's the biggest
to be honest with you, I'm surprised it hasn't been done up until this point, or successfully. Like, we're not charging for anything. You want to come as an MSP, you got to get yourself there. But once you're there, right, there's not $1 for you to go walk in and effectively get expert advice that you would otherwise be paying for, all in one place. So that's our goal. And when I raised my hand and started knocking on people's doors saying, hey, you interested in participating as somebody who can, kind of talks, expertly on a topic, I got a lot of hands up. I mean, it really wasn't hard to get interest. So just curious, right? After all this time, after all these events, why somebody hadn't actually gone down that lane, but I digress. That's what we're doing.
Yeah. I think, a lot of it is the events have a blueprint that they've been following for a very long time. And there's such critical mass at some of these larger events where it's tough to even get people to come into some of the rooms because of some of the competing rooms going on at the same time. To get into something that's workshop based, I almost feel like the big boys are like, hey, that's a risk that we're not willing to take, because what isn't broke right now is fine. But throughout this conversation, I've been listening to two themes coming up over and over: innovation and iteration, right? Try something, see what works, get it to a point, and if it's not working, shift. That is this industry. It recycles every 5 years. I'm 5 years removed from being a formal MSP, being now on the vendor side of things for the last 3. And, when I got out, ransomware was barely on the table. Now it's the big, one of the biggest things that we talk about, right? So the point is, you're constantly reinventing yourself. We were break fix, we were cloud, we were security. You move through these motions. And I think, what I'm hearing is you're trying to take some steps to really bring some different ways to look at gatherings. And I think that's how we have to look at them too, is they're gatherings. It's not just about the conference.
100%. And then occasionally talk about, some of the stuff that's happening, right? Like, I think Microsoft went down today. The Teams was down also last week, right? Like all of a sudden, like, I find it funny when I talk to MSPs and I was like, so what do you do when Microsoft goes down? Oh, they never go down. They have all this redundancy. I'm like, I'm not so sure you're on track there.
Necessarily true, but yeah.
I had the opposite conversation during a demo today where there was two of us with, of course, gray hair like this, talking about one of the best things when we were starting cloud was when AWS finally went down. Because that's how customers finally started understanding it doesn't matter how big you are, how much money you have, there will be downtime, right? And it made that you have to be up 100% of the time, all the time. And I'm going to spend $1,000 a month with you, and I'm going to have a Linksys firewall with one connection. And those conversations we once upon a time had. But I do enjoy those forums when you see things like Microsoft's down again, so I'm going over to Google. Okay, that was it. That's it. We're done.
Yeah.
And like Google doesn't have a problem, and AWS, Azure, at Rackspace had their whole Exchange environment blown up the other, last 2 months ago. I mean, listen, it's a new world. Like everybody's on the chart.
So so it sounds like you've got some great plans coming on the horizon. Those are some exciting initiatives coming into. You talked a little bit about your background in business. You're managing 3 different initiatives, 2 true companies. When we say true companies, active everyday companies. Talk a little bit, because this is something I see a lot of young leaders struggle with. How to grow, delegate, and scale. And maybe George, you can give us a couple ideas of how you made that work, some of the successes you had across that, and where the failures were, because we've all failed in the scale game.
Yeah, that's a great question. My idea on this has changed over the years, because as you see, I learn, right? That's, I think, the top thing I can advise people on. If you were at DataCon in Washington, D.C. last year, you saw Gary Vee, who I've seen now twice in person, one at IT by Designs Build It, and then, DataCon in D.C. And he says, hire fast, promote faster, fire fastest. Now, you may not agree with that, but it's not wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, I think, some people say, hey, I like the rope mentality, right? Give them the rope. Did they climb it or did they hang? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And I think the problem is that, there's a lot of people out there, especially like the workforce situation during the pandemic, and even now with all these big tech companies cutting by double-digit percentages, a lot of people on the streets kind of flipped the buying market, right? Before it was a, kind of like, if you use the housing market as that analogy, right? Before one time it was a seller's market, now it's a buyer's market. Here's the reality. A lot of people say they can do a lot of things, and you just don't know what the deal is until you can get into it. Definitely, like the hiring process is archaic, analog, and probably not what it needs to be, at least in this country. I don't know about others. Bottom line is, like people got to either, take the initiative and actually try, and trying is good. I'm not saying, and hopefully succeeding, but if you don't try at all, then you shouldn't be in the job. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. So I think part of what I've seen is, like a lot of people a little bit, and I'm sure you've seen it too, right? They kind of lie about what their capabilities are, what they've done, where they've been. And then when they get in the driver's seat, they have no idea how to even start the ignition. So you kind of need to go through a lot of that very quickly. And unfortunately, like time is the one thing that we all don't get back. So delegation, well, I think, I have definitely subscribed to the idea that shorter meetings are the more successful ones, right? I don't need to go into very long meetings. Very small targeted meetings with less people in them have better outcomes. That's number one. Number two, delegation. Well, hey, let's lay out what I need you to do. And then we're going to have very quick follow-ups on what your progression is. If I leave a long amount of time open and I come back and I find out you didn't even get to ground zero, that's a problem. And so shorter, more successive meetings have been successful. And then like, lastly, it just comes down to, I don't know if there's a way to measure willpower. I mean, as a guy from Philly, and like, we put the Rocky on the wall as like, our window, picture, but, like either you're gonna like take successful steps, ask the right questions and start stumbling into where you need to go, or you're gonna fake it. You can go chat GPT all you want. That ain't gonna do it, guys. I hate to tell you that. So if you try that and that's what you're passing off as your work, find another job, because you're not in the right place. But, I guess back to Gary Vee, and I'll kind of round out my thought, the Great Resignation, nah, those people are already going to resign anyway. How about the great never applied?
Yep.
How about that? Yeah, these people, like some of these jobs, and let's face it, MSP land, it's a lot of heavy lifting. It's a lot of nights, a lot of weekends, a lot of holidays. It's not exactly the job that these people are shooting for out of school today. And like, unfortunately, you got to work.
Yeah, it takes a special breed to be in this industry, right? Tim, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, look, one of the things that we do all day, every day is we recruit for salespeople for MSPs all over the country.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy how 12 months ago, the mindset, how it had shifted, right?
Huge.
The candidate all of a sudden had more power than they've ever had in interviews. Although I will say, I do feel like it's starting to turn a little bit back. Definitely not where it was pre-pandemic.
Yes, very much.
But it is definitely starting to turn back. And it is, look, I agree with your hire fast, fire fast. I mean, yes, you got to give people a chance, but there's also a lot of people who like to fake stuff out there. So
yeah,
ChatGPT,
quick. You'll
catch
see.
Quick.
I think from a sales aspect, for the 2 seconds it's worth mentioning, it's probably the hardest job in any industry to hire for, especially MSP sales. I mean, let's face it, it's a long sales cycle. It's a little bit hard to get like excited because it takes a lot of time and a lot of repetition to get to a close. And I think that you need people that are super organized, right? And have the people skills. And I think that's very hard in technology land because there's a lot of good technical people. But when it comes to sales, like you need to have your people skills down, or else it doesn't matter what sales role you're in. You need to get work.
Yeah.
And I always say the biggest challenge in sales is sometimes the best sales job they ever do is the one that gets them the job, right?
Yes.
You know,
that's the biggest contract they're trying to sell right there.
It's how do you figure out who the real, the guys are that are going to stick with it and the pretenders are, right? But that's any role out there.
It is.
So we're getting near the end of our time today. Sade, we've been doing a lot of chatting over here. What's upcoming for you in your role? What are some of the things that you're promoting right now, actively at this stage?
So actively, really all efforts at this point are going towards the new kind of structured events that MSPI is having, which is the MSP Community Mines that George had mentioned earlier. The parties, of course, but MSP Community Mines, just adding on to a point that George had mentioned before, because a lot of the times, as we've heard and as we've been to all these conferences, sometimes you go into these sessions and they're really great sessions with great information, but at the end of it, you come out of it and you don't have anything, or you just have ideas and then you never implement them. The goal, at least with MSP Community Mines, is not only are these type of workshops with people that are leaders within the industry, but also something that you'll be able to take, something tangible that you'll be able to leave with. And so that's definitely a huge goal that we have.
Beautiful.
Very cool.
George, any closing comments?
I mean, it's full on 2019 again, guys. 100+ events on the road, 200,000 miles in the air, 38,000 miles behind the windshield, Zoom calls on while you're walking through the airport rather than behind the desk. I mean, we're back. It's back, but I do definitely take a lot of the talking heads are saying 2023 could be an economic kind of downturn. I know the technology bubble has always kind of weathered that storm better than most industries. I do take that into account, that like we don't know what the end of 2023 looks like. So while we're flying around the planet and talking to a lot of people, you kind of keep your pulse, your hand on the pulse there to figure out what people think are going to happen, because to me, that's the real information, right? I could watch any news channel, any blog, any Google News, whatever. That's great. But I want to hear it from the people on the street. And then that'll really guide where we go from here. I mean, my big concern, as an industry is, there's going to be a lot of new MSPs because people are coming out of corporate IT without a job and they're starting, which is great. I prognosticated net new MSPs globally. I am concerned a little bit on the vendor side, just because You know, like I'm hearing all these companies kind of put their toe into MSP land. 12 months later, they crush the entire division, or, you know, longstanding vendors now all of a sudden, you know, their money's drying up. They got to go for more rounds. Like, we do rely on a lot of different technology and companies that put that out in MSP land. And like, I think you need to start asking some of those questions to make sure that you're on solid ground. That's all.
That's fair. It's a fair point.
Awesome.
Well, George, Sade, appreciate you coming on. You can catch this MSP Business School along with all of our other podcasts anywhere where you can find a podcast, to include YouTube. Any of your contact information will be up when this is posted, and it was really great having you both here.
I should see where MSP Community Mines goes. It's definitely.
I hope you come. Please do.
Yeah.
And by the way, like, let's get some coupons or something and help the guy on the farm get a generator.
Yeah, right. Oh man, trust me, this he'll hear about it. It'll be good. It'll be good.
First guy to moan when we do something without him. Second guy to continually not show up. Right, Tim?
Yeah. Oh man.
All right, guys. Well, hey, thank you very much for joining us today. Really appreciate it, and we'll see you all again next week.
Thank you.